Hello everyone and welcome to this CU Boulder Flight Operations supplemental video. In this video, we'll briefly review how to plan for a typical UAS flight and reiterate once again how to file a NOTAM. Before we begin, we want to direct your attention to our webpage. The webpage can be found here at this following link. And this webpage is a great home base for you to find information and learn new things. A lot of important tabs are listed here on the right side. The tabs that we're going to be focusing on using today are going to be the helpful list of UAS websites tab, as well as the training documents tab. So let's just say we're planning to do a typical UAS flight, and the client or person who wants us to plan for a flight wants us to plan a flight around the Boulder Reservoir, specifically the small little lake just to the north of the reservoir. Let's just say he wants us to sample this air over the reservoir, 48 hours from the point right now, and from an altitude from the surface to about 400 feet. How would we go about planning to do this flight? Well, first, let's go back to the home website page and go down to our training documents tab. One of the biggest training documents tabs that we have here is going to be the COA flight checklist. This is a checklist that essentially lists all the pre-flight action items that we need to do from a high mission level planning standard. And if we'll walk through this checklist, we should be fairly confident that our flight can be conducted safely and legally. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do here today. Okay, so in order to begin this checklist, we're going to need to find our flight location on our sectional chart map. A good way to do that is to come up here to the helpful list of UAS websites and go over to the Sky Vector tab. This will populate Sky Vector, which is the website that essentially shows all of our sectional charts in a world view. From there, we can kind of figure out where we plan on flying based on, some of the previous information that we have. So let's just say, we plan on flying just the north of this Boulder Reservoir right here, on top of the 3. So that's how we know where we're going to fly. The first thing to do on this COA flight checklist is to check for TFRs and NOTAMs. The first thing we want to do is check for TFRs. This can be done on the tfr.faa.gov website, which can be found on this helpful list of UAS websites tab, or we can go ahead and type it in. Okay, once on this website, we can go over to the TFR map and begin to zoom in on our flight area. Okay, so this is our flight area just to the north of Boulder. I don't see any TFRs in this immediate area. I do see one over here, but that's not super close to where we're flying, so we're going to go ahead and disregard that. The next way that we can check for TFRs, I should say, would be on the Sky Vectors tab. By coming over to the layer section and making sure the Sky Vectors temporary flight restriction layer is selected. You can verify this by turning the tab on and off and making sure that TFR actually populates. Okay, so this is the TFR section complete. The next thing we can do is check for NOTAMs. We can do that by going to NOTAMs.faa.gov, or you can go over here to Sky Vector and make sure the DROTAMs tab is selected and seeing that we're having some drone-related NOTAMs pop up, and then scrolling in and confirming that there are no drone-related NOTAMs at our flight area. So as you can see here, there are some drone-related NOTAMs, but there aren't any in this flight area. Okay, that completes the drones, or that completes the TFR and NOTAMs portion of this checklist. Next thing we're going to do is move on to our airspace class. So the first thing we want to check is just our basic airspace. So zooming in on our flight location right here, we'll have to determine the basic airspace. So the airspace that I see here, although congested, appears to me to be going from the surface to 700 feet is class Golf, then class Echo from 700 feet to 18,000 feet, and then class Alpha. So that is my basic airspace class analysis. Now I need to move on to look at special use airspace. Special use airspace is essentially broken up into regulatory and non-regulatory special use airspace, consisting of things like prohibited areas, warning areas, controlled firing areas. That's special use airspace. It looks a little something like this. It's denoted with figures that look a little something like this. And if you don't know, or you're having some issues remembering what special use airspace is, feel free to refresh your memory with some of the reference material we have selected, but I don't see any special use airspace in this area. So that goes ahead and checks this box for us. The next thing we're going to do is check for military training routes. Military training routes look a little something like this, where they are gray lines that say IR and VR, and they're followed by a couple numbers. If they're a little bit difficult to see, you can come up to the top right corner here and click on the world low chart, and you'll be able to depict them a little bit more easily as they're brown lines. But going back to the world VFR chart and zooming into our flight location, I don't see any military training routes in our area. So that checks this box off. The next thing we need to do is check time and airspace level reversions. So if we're flying in airspace that is associated with an airport that's either Class E, Class D, or Class C, it has the possibility of reverting. And if it does revert, we'll need to be able to figure out when it reverts and what it reverts to. If you have any more questions on reversions, make sure to look at our supplemental material. But in this case, we are not associated with any of those relative airspaces. So this check mark or this bullet point can get checked off. The next thing we're going to do is look at the nearby airports with restrictions. So let's go ahead and look at this map and look for nearby airports. I see a couple big ones here. I see Vance Brand, Boulder, Erie, and Rocky Mountain. The closest one I see here is going to be the Boulder Airport. So looking under these bullet points here, I'm going to have to see if the nearest airport that we have is towered, if it has an instrument approach, or if it doesn't. So looking right now, I can tell you this airport isn't towered, but I don't know 100% if it has an instrument approach procedure or not. To figure that out, I'm going to go over here once again to this side tab, scroll on down to Air Nav. And by the way, each of these bullet points or each of these headers has bullet points underneath them that tells you why the website is good or what the website's good for. But I'll go ahead and open up Air Nav here. I'll then go ahead and type in the three-letter ICAO identifier for the airport in question. And from there, I can go ahead and scroll all the way down and look for instrument approach procedures. This section here must say there are no published instrument procedures for the airport, or there are. If you don't see this specifically stated, there are instrument approach procedures for that airport. So in this case, I don't see any instrument approach procedures for this airport, meaning we need to be 2 nautical miles away from the airport reference point. This is a specific airport reference point, and it can be found here in the top left corner of AirNav. With this information, I'll go ahead and go over to Google Earth. I'll go ahead and select this one point, which will bring us to the airport reference point. Notice that it is in the center of the airport for this example, but the airport reference point may not be in the center of the airport for other examples. From there, I'm going to go ahead and know that this is our flight location. And I can go ahead and grab our measuring tool, confirm that our measuring tool has been selected to indicate distances in nautical miles, zoom into the center of our airport reference point, and go over to Cott Lake. I'm going to place this distance right here, just so we can see that our length away from the airport reference point is 2.8, which is acceptable here. This is as far south as I plan on flying when I do my survey work, so we know we're good to go in that regard. I'll go ahead now and turn on my chart bundle so I can see airports a little bit more clearly with the maps overlaid to get a better idea of where I plan on flying. I can also see if there's any other airports in the area, like Vance Brand Airport. Doing a quick general check, once again, not checking specifically with the airport reference point, I can see that we're about 5 nautical miles away, which is acceptable. I won't check that specifically because I know that's enough margin. I can go ahead and check Erie as well, and that's 8. So I'm okay with that. And we've identified that the closest airport does meet the bullet points stated in our COA flight checklist here. Next thing we want to do is check weather restrictions. The general rule of thumb for checking weather before a flight, if this is a 48 hours in advance, it's going to be to use your browser of choice or application of choice to get a good weather forecast, because we don't require you guys to read aviation related forecasts. So just get a general forecast on your application of choice. and see that the weather is going to be good for that day. Good in the sense that, we'll have greater than 3 statute miles visibility and 1,000-foot ceilings. But if the weather is questionable when you show up, then you can consult a METAR. Consulting a METAR consists of, going over here to Sky Vector, making sure the text weather is on, highlighting over the airport, and getting the METAR. With that complete, we can now check our flight time. If we're flying within 48 or if we're flying 48 hours in advance, we want to make sure that start and stop time doesn't fall within nighttime or additional training is required. And then the next thing we need to go do is file a NOTAM. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Okay, so to go ahead and file a NOTAM, we can go back over here to our Helpful UAS Websites tab, scroll on down to our Flight Service section, and this is our home page, so you can go ahead and sign in. Alrighty, once signed in, you'll be at a page that looks like this. You can go up to the Plan and Brief section, go down to the UAS NOTAM form section, and you'll be taken to a page like this. From here, we can begin to start filling out our NOTAM. So our aircraft registration, we can just put in the registration that we got when we commercially registered our aircraft with the FAA. From there, we can go ahead and select the altitudes which we plan on flying. Per the blanket go, we're only allowed to fly up to 400 feet. And since there's no structures in this area, this makes sense for what we want to do. We'll state that, hey, we're just going to fly, once. I can go ahead and put in the date because we're flying roughly 48 hours from now. We can put in a time which suits that. I'm going to make it 3 o'clock local time just so it's daylight time. Perfect. Moving on over here is going to be the gotcha part of the NOTAM. Because of certain COAs, we need to file NOTAMs in the appropriate manner. The way we define our NOTAM operating area for the UAS flight, of the UAS operation, is with this 9-character string. This 9-character string consists of identifying a nav aid, identifying a direction from that nav aid, and identifying a distance from that nav aid, and at that point, a radius. And the reason we do this is so pilots who are operating in the National Airspace System can easily identify where an operation is going to occur. So in order to do this, we're going to need to define an area, here just to the very, very north of the reservoir with a VOR. VORs are depicted with compass roses and symbols which look like this, and they have their associated information boxes like this. In this case, this is the GIL VOR with the identifier GLL, or Golf Lima Lima. Typically, the rule of thumb for finding a nav aid is to pick the closest nav aid that you see to your flight location. So in this case, it looks like this nav aid is going to be the Jeffco VOR with the BJC, or Bravo Juliet Charlie identifier. So the first 3 characters I'm going to put into this 9-character string is going to be BJC. The next 3 are going to be a direction. So a direction off of the VOR. A good way to do this is to look at this compass rose and follow it outbound to a point which states where. Okay, and the next thing we want to do is find a direction off of this VOR, off this nav aid. Now we can do this a couple different ways. One way of doing this is by going to the compass roses that are surrounding VORs and looking at the markings which indicate the directions in degrees from magnetic north around these VORs and make that in relation to our flight location. Another way we can figure out a direction is by going in here to Sky Vector, by clicking on the VOR, and by going to a point, and based on that, take the heading that we get here and subtract it or add it to a line of magnetic variation as shown by these long dashed magenta lines. For this case, I'm going to go ahead and stick with option 1. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on our flight location, select a map, which is more conducive for seeing clearer objects in a very condensed environment. And I'm going to go ahead and look at this VOR and look at our flying location. So if our flying location is right here to the north of the Boulder Reservoir and I work my way down, it looks like I'm kind of passing through 325 degrees on our way to Boulder Reservoir. So with that, I can go ahead and now plug that into flight service. So we'll go ahead and put that in here. And lastly, the next thing we need is going to be a distance. So we can find a distance on Google Earth by going from the center of the VOR and going outbound and making sure nautical miles are displayed. So we have about 11 here. Putting this back into our NOTAM, that would be displayed as 011. So now we have a 9-character string, which identifies where we need to fly. I'm going to put in a sample radius of 0.2 here, and we can go ahead and click map. And then we can zoom out and look at the VFR chart and see if we're close. It looks like we're a little bit off in the sense that we're a little bit to the left of the area that we want to fly, and we may not be as far out as we need to be. To adjust this, I'm going to go in here and just start iterating through my NOTAM string to see which values best describe the flight area which I plan on flying. So it looks like I might have been a little bit off with my initial estimation here, but we'll just keep going through the iterative process of trying to find the correct string. So it looks like I'm a little bit too far here. And it looks like this one's right over our airport. If we want to go a little bit less with our distance, we can actually add some decimals. And as you can see, this perfectly covers our flight location. Next point of note here is just to make sure the radius is realistic. And now we can go ahead and move on to the contact information. You can just put contact information in here, typically last name or department and a phone number, and then end with the COA identifier. This COA identifier is the same COA ID that's found on the top of the blanket COA or the COA you plan on flying under. Although unfortunately, with the current flight service system, they don't recognize the most up-to-date COA. So we're still having to use one of the older COAs. This is the current COA that we have, current blanket COA ID. But as you'll see, when I go ahead and attempt to submit this, oops. It will say the COA ID is invalid. So to change that, we're going to have to put in the old COA ID. Alrighty, and this is the box that we get, just confirming our flight area. And from there, we can go ahead and hit submit. I'm not going to actually submit here just because I don't want to submit an aircraft registration that's inaccurate. But this concludes the video and essentially concludes, how to basically go over how to plan for a typical or very common UAS flight and how to file a NOTAM. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach back out. We hope this was informative. Take care and have a great rest of your day.